Hello and welcome to another video from Flash Jazz Cat. And in this video I present to you what is often regarded as the holy grail among Atari 8-bit home computers, the 1200XL. And I haven't featured one of these for a while now, probably quite a long time. I did a lot of builds using these machines on live streams when I first started the channel, or when I first started doing computer videos on the channel. But it's been a while now and it's time to feature one again. People still hanker after these things and they're even more rare now than they were a few years ago. Anyone who's aware of Bob Woolley, who goes by the name of Bob 1200XL on Atari Age on the forum, he had loads of these things. He collected them for a long time seemingly. He just accrued them, acquired them. And he had them by the dozen. I mean, he may have had over 100. I'm speculating there, but he, at one point about 10 years ago or more, he decided to give a load of them away very generously for the price of shipping. And I got one of his machines. The first thing he sent me was a Perspex strip for the one 1200XL I had at the time, because mine was cracked. It was very generous of him to post a replacement across. But later on, a couple of years later, after most of his machines had been given away to other community members, we were talking again, and he actually built me a sort of a hybrid Frankenstein 1200XL out of bits of case and a motherboard that he had lying around, which was very, very nice of him. It really was. So that's why now, even having sold one of my 1200XLs, I've still got 3 left. Now this isn't mine, this one belongs to a customer. And in a minute, I'm going to go through exactly what we're going to put in it. But first, a word from our sponsor, PCBWay, who have over 11 years of experience in the field of PCB prototyping and production. And in September, they have a couple of very interesting offers, including a free purple solder mask. That's right, go beyond green, dare to design bold. Purple PCBs look incredible, but usually come at a premium. Not this September. For the entire month, PCBWay are making their eye-catching purple solder mask completely free. And as if that wasn't generous enough, PCBWay's September spotlight is on TPU FDM printing. The deal's simple. The higher the weight, the more you save. Enjoy discounts up to 80% off. So if you need a prototype PCB or can use any of the other services on offer, please visit PCBWay today. Okay, so here's our 1200XL. Gorgeous looking machine. Very, very nice keyboard. This one's completely stock as far as I know. It's got a little sticker on the bottom. PAS005. Very nicely packaged up anyway. And I'm going to put it to one side for a moment, just while we look at the little box of tricks that we've got to go inside. So we've got an SD card there, which is an approved brand SD card for use with this, which is a side 3.2. I'm not sure where this one was obtained from. I'm assuming it was bought a while ago because you can't buy them now. Ultimate 1MB, which is again an older board. This one, 27th of March 2024. And what kind of RAM's that got? And that's got Alliance RAM, so we should be seeing a diode somewhere on there. Yes, there we go. We've got the bodge diode just down there, so that should work fine. Now for those of you who don't know, of course, I should probably go through what these things actually are. The side 3 is a multi-cartridge, for which I wrote the bulk of the firmware. It allows you to run games basically from the menu. There's lots of cartridges like this around nowadays, but that's the one I was involved with. This is a combined RAM upgrade, multi-OS upgrade, device control system, real-time clock, ROM. That's what that is. This is basically the preeminent 1MB upgrade at the moment for Atari 8-bit computers. That's some wiring that you get with it. That's the ribbon cables that go with the Ultimate 1MB. This is a Spectre AV, which is a legacy video upgrade for Atari 8-bit computers, all of them. And the 1200XL has particularly awful video out of the box. This is a slightly inferior version. It's not a version of UAV. It's a completely novel implementation. But you have UAV by Brian Edwards, which is the class-leading S-video and composite video upgrade. This does a similar job, does it pretty well. So it's going to significantly improve the video quality of the 1200XL anyway. And finally, we've got a PokeyMAX board, which is, I think this is a version 2. That is a stereo Pokey upgrade. It's all done in FPGA, and it does Covox and SID emulation, all sorts of stuff. We've got a nice little set of upgrades there, so we're going to have stereo audio and all sorts of fancy audio capabilities. We're going to have nice video, we're going to have storage and a game loader, and we're going to have a RAM upgrade, and that's basically that. So I'll put all that back and we'll take the machine apart and have a little look at the motherboard. And I have to say thank you to those of you who have followed across to my new guitar channel, FJC Guitar. I didn't call it FJC Guitars after all, because it's not just about guitars, it's about guitar in the realm of guitar playing as well, which will become apparent later on. But yes, that video, the first video on that new channel, FJC Guitar, if you search for that on YouTube, all one word, has done remarkably well for a first upload on a brand new channel. We've got, I think, 40 subscribers or something so far. I can't remember offhand. But the video's done remarkably well. It's got well over 500 views after a week or so. So I'm very, very happy with that. And I really appreciate anybody who was already a subscriber or viewer of this channel who decided to pop across. And I'll have new content uploaded on that channel very shortly. In fact, to be quite honest with you, it's becoming a little bit confusing managing two channels with completely different content, and I have to use the same workbench for both things at the moment. But anyway, we'll get there. So yes, I do appreciate that. So once again, if you're interested in guitars, guitar maintenance, guitar playing, guitar renovation, cheap guitars, second-hand guitars, pop over to FJC Guitar. So we'll take the motherboard out anyway, and I'll just give you a little look at it, and then I'll get to work putting the upgrades in, and I'll talk you through them after it's done, because you've seen me soldering this stuff in 1,000 times before. And with my eyesight being the way it is nowadays, it's very, very difficult to actually let you see what I'm looking at, because I can't see what I'm looking at without desk magnification. So yeah, so please bear with me. Anyway, let's go closer in on this motherboard. I've got my pointing device.
Have you got a large one?
I've had no complaints so far.
So all 1200XLs are NTSC machines. That's the first and foremost observation. And they're the only 8-bit Atari, interestingly enough, which is not tooled up to potentially accommodate a PAL configuration. There simply is no PAL configuration at all. So unlike on, say, an NTSC Atari 800XL, there's no area on this NTSC 1200XL unpopulated where you would otherwise find circuitry and a second crystal to generate the PAL color burst signal, which can't be that particular frequency can't be generated. It's not a factor of the master clock frequency, so it needs a second crystal. Now that's not to say it's not possible to convert a 1200XL to a PAL configuration. There's lots of handy little boards that have been designed over the years to do that, and most of them just sit in the GTIA socket here. You can also do it with a Sophia board, because the Sophia board will generate that PAL color burst internally, and it'll do that automatically depending on what the frequency of the master crystal is. Now of course PAL and NTSC Ataris have different master crystals, master clock frequencies. Now a Sophia, if it sees that the system clock frequency is a PAL frequency, it will generate the PAL color burst signal accordingly. Even if it sees that it's an NTSC system, it just generates the color frequency as a factor of the system clock frequency, or a multiple thereof. I can't remember which. I'm getting me words mixed up, but you get the idea. So that's one option. Or alternatively, there was a couple of what we called PAL color burst boards, or GTIA adapters, which were relatively inexpensive and self-contained, and they'd just plug into the GTIA chip. Of course, this assumes that you've put a PAL antic in the board and a suitable system crystal. So looking around the rest of the board, another interesting thing about this particular machine is that it has a high and low set of operating system ROMs. So it's a 2-chip operating system ROM, basically handling 8 kilobytes each. There's the MMU, memory management unit. Got some logic here for RAM and ROM. Here is our Pokey chip down here, handling keyboard and audio. Here is the CPU, the 6502. Sally. Here's the PIA chip, the 6520. Here is the Antic chip. We've got GTIA here. Cartridge ports on the side. It's in the end of a tunnel, which makes it very, very difficult for some of the modern, wider cartridge shells to actually fit. But more on that later, because I'm going to have to modify this side 3 cartridge to actually fit in this machine. We've got these angled joystick ports down here. RF modulator, monitor port, channel switch for the RF modulator, the SIO ports over on the back here, and then we've got this big bridge rectifier here, because this machine runs off 9 volts AC as opposed to 5 volts. Now that 9 volt AC is rectified down to 5 volts to power the entire system, and I think there's an unused 12 volt supply as well, 12 volt DC. But this heatsink here takes up well over half of the back side of the motherboard and part of the side here. So that can be a little bit limiting in terms of what you can install and bring out on the back plane of the machine, because you got this big obstruction here. One way to get rid of it if you needed to, which I did many years ago, was to modify the whole computer to run directly from a 5 volt power supply. But I wouldn't recommend it, put it that way. It was a mess of wires. It did allow me to get rid of all of this in the corner here, and actually I fitted a 50-way parallel bus on the back of the machine. I've since sold that machine anyway. I sort of fell out of love with it a bit. I prefer something a little bit closer to stock in terms of the outward appearance of the computer now. But so that's the 1200XL motherboard. It's an interesting machine. It's a big space inside the case. There is room to put a lot of stuff in here, but it's kind of odd, as I say, because half of the back of the machine is taken up with this enormous heatsink. You've also got the unreleased machines that exist in prototype form, like the 1400XL, the 1450XL, which are a lot closer to what you would really want in terms of functionality, because they did have the parallel bus, basically the same case, basically the same form factor, same keyboard. Probably would have been the nicest 8-bit computer in terms of looks and functionality that you could imagine. Adding all the modern upgrades to it, I mean, it would just be fantastic, but unfortunately it never happened. There have been reproduction motherboards, and even original motherboards, a stash of which were found some years ago. So you can potentially build up a 1400XL motherboard, but the big problem is really finding a case for it. I've got a spare 1200XL motherboard which was sent by a customer who'd attempted to change the sockets here himself just to fit bigger sockets to do the modification, the single chip modification, which I'm going to do here to convert the machine in readiness for Ultimate 1MB. But he managed to screw it up. He couldn't quite figure out what he'd done wrong, so he offered to, he'd actually gone out and bought another 1200XL. It was quite an expensive mistake, and he sent the motherboard in. He kept the case for some other purpose, and he sent the motherboard in, and it wasn't too bad. I was able to fix it, and he was happy for me to keep that repaired board. So I've got a spare board as well, which lacks a case, and you're just not going to find a 1200XL case these days that isn't already being used. So it'd be nice if we had all these injection molded cases that some of the other platforms enjoy. The Atari world's a lot smaller, so it'd be a lot more of an uphill struggle to try and remanufacture high quality injection molded cases for these things. But anyway, that's another discussion entirely. Now, as mentioned, we're going to fit Ultimate 1MB to this machine. Some 1200XLs were shipped with 28-pin operating system ROM sockets. The masked ROMs were always 24-pin, so this is basically the same size as a basic chip in one of the later revision models. Note that the 1200XL did not have built-in basic, no internal basic, but sometimes the operating system ROMs were supplied on EEPROM chips which were longer, so some of these come out of the factory with the longer sockets in them. If you can't desolder sockets well, if you're not competent doing that, it's possible to add, using header strips, add the extra legs here and kind of force the Ultimate 1MB connector into what you end up. But I'm just going to take these old sockets off, fit a suitable proper 28-pin socket. The modification necessary to prepare the machine for Ultimate 1MB, to basically bring it in line with the ROM configuration of a later XL model. Bob Woolley describes this modification. The modification was originally intended to simply make the machine functionally compatible with the later XL, so a single OS ROM chip, internal basic even, by adding a couple of address lines, patch wires, and replacing this MMU chip, which is specific to the 1200 XL. It's got chip selects for the two different OS ROM chips. Replacing this with the standard XL XE MMU, and when you've done all that, you basically get something functionally identical to an 800 XL, but without the parallel bus on the back. Other than that, it's completely equivalent. So we need to do that a little bit first before we can install the Ultimate 1MB. So I'm going to go away and do that. As I say, I've done this work many times on the channel before, but now we're in never done it in 4K, so this time you're going to see the results of the work in 4K. So I'll go away and I'll do the modification. I'll flash this up on the screen. I'll put a link to the modification in the description. So let's go ahead and prep this machine for Ultimate 1MB. Okay, so you can see we've got the original sockets removed, and I've took all of the jumpers off here because they have to move as well. I can't remember offhand where they have to move to, but they get completely rearranged. And I'm going to populate both these sockets just to give me a little bit of flexibility when it comes to where to plug in this ribbon connector. I can adjust that depending on these jumpers here, just to make sure I keep out the way of the connectors coming out the back of the PokeyMAX board. So I'll probably put this at the back just to keep it out of the way. But if I put sockets in both of these locations, I can decide later on. Hang on a minute, lads. I've got a great idea. And my great idea concerns how do we get stereo audio out of this machine, because of course the DIN 5 video jack has no capacity whatsoever for stereo audio. There's only one audio pin. How on earth are we going to get stereo out of this computer? Now in the past, you see there's a hole here in this little heatsink. There you are, you can see it. That's been handy in the past. For example, when I've installed a Sophia, which has a DVI connector here, and there's no capacity for outputting digital video, so the analog audio, be it mono or stereo, has to come out somewhere else. Now if it's mono, you could use a standard video connector and just tap the audio from the monitor jack, but if it's stereo audio, you've still got the problem of how to get the stereo out of the machine. And what I've done in the past sometimes is I've mounted a 3.5mm headphone jack through this plate here, through this heatsink, and I've cut a corresponding hole in the case, and that works out quite well. It means you've got nothing attached to the case, which is also wired to the inside of the machine, which is a big pain for me. I hate stuff like that. And it looks quite neat. Now it occurred to me, however, that I don't think we're going to need the RF modulator on this computer, and there's already a hole. So what I think I'll do is I'll mount a 3.5mm headphone jack exactly where the RF modulator connector used to be. Now if I'm to mount this to the board, the problem is going to be finding a 3.5mm connector board mounted that's going to come out at this height, because it's quite high up off the board. So what I might end up having to do is just attach the headphone jack to the case, but I'll put a push fit connector, so you'll still be able to get the motherboard out of the case without having to undo the connector on the back of the case. I really don't like connectors mounted on the case of the machine, because if you hardwire them to whatever device they plug into, it makes maintaining the computer when you have to take it apart a real pain in the arse. But I might do that anyway. That might be the best way to do it, because I don't think I'm going to find a connector that I'm going to be able to board mount that's going to be that tall. Yeah, so here's a connector, the kind of connector I'd normally use in these circumstances if I was mounting one on the board and cutting a hole to suit it. But that's not going to work in this situation because the connector is going to be far too low down. It would have to be mounted on some sort of block. So I think I'll just get one that screws to the back of the case. I might need to use some washers to make it actually fit, but yeah, I think we'll do that anyway. That'll solve the problem of how to get audio out of the computer. So I'm going to add those jumper wires, reconfigure this jumper bank here. We should be able to get the Ultimate 1MB in at least, and then I'll be able to power on the machine, show that working, and then we can progress to installing the Spectre AV and the PokeyMAX, and then we'll test the machine with side 3.2. That's going to be fun. getting this thing to work on a 1200 XL. And one, of course, I've also got to shave the sides of the cartridge shell down as well, so it'll actually fit in the connector. So still a fair bit to do, but I'll work my magic and you will join me shortly. Right, so this is the scene that typically ensues when the client tells you that the machine works fine and you assume that to be correct and start modifying the board before you plugged the machine in and turned it on in its stock condition, which is exactly what I did. When you do plug the machine in and turn it on, just to check that it works, but the one time that you don't do that because you're too lazy to go into the cupboard and look for the 9V AC power supply that needed to actually run this machine, you get caught out. And the problem in this particular case turned out to be a dead PIA chip. Now, that would have took a little bit of time to figure out, obviously, had I turned the machine on before I started work. The problem was that it was booting to a green screen, and I discovered this after installing the Ultimate 1MB. Obviously, when you've modified the machine, the reasonable assumption is that it's something to do with the modifications you've made. So I suspected it would be the Ultimate 1MB ribbon cables, which are a natural weak spot because I've made those up myself in the desk vise to be of the optimal length. So I replaced those with cables from a spare machine. It didn't make any difference. I tried a different Ultimate 1MB in case the Ultimate 1MB was faulty. That didn't make any difference. I tried swapping out some chips, the CPU, PIE, Antic, etc, etc. That didn't make any difference. And at that point, of course, the thing to do, which is exactly what I did, is to reverse all the changes you made since you actually opened the machine. So I reverted the jumpers here to stock configuration. The wire that was going from pin 23 of the CPU to the top of the removed W6 jumper, I've rerouted that, so it's reinstated that jumper on the bottom of the board. I put the original MMU back in, I put the original OS ROMs back in, and it still booted to a green screen. So we definitely had a problem. So it wasn't the Ultimate 1MB, it didn't appear to be any IC that was causing the issue. I even swapped all the RAM out. Obviously, with this machine not having a PBI bus, we don't have the luxury of using syscheck to check for RAM problems, so I swapped all the RAM out with a RAM from a spare 1200 XL with known working RAM. I suspected the delay line chip, which was the only chip soldered to the board, so I've desoldered that, swapped that out. Didn't make any difference, boots to a green screen. Now, one thing I was a little bit worried about, obviously, is that I'd removed the 24-pin machine sockets under the original OS ROMs and I'd replaced them with 28-pin precision sockets. So that's the precision sockets are like these ones with little turned pins. Replaced them with those, and that appeared to go perfectly well. But as is commonly the case with these precision sockets, the original chips didn't sit very well in the socket. So although I pinged all the signals, the address lines and the data lines from the CPU to the OS ROM, and everything pinged out perfectly well, in complete desperation I was starting to suspect that there was a problem with those sockets, either the fit of the ICs in the sockets or some other issue. I'm a little bit on the fence about these precision sockets actually. They can cause connectivity issues, especially with the original ICs. With stuff like these aftermarket adapters, not such an issue. So I did some troubleshooting on it last night, completely exasperated. I actually had the oscilloscope on the machine earlier today, trying to see if there was any flatlining address or data lines. That didn't really tell me a great deal. So eventually, anyway, and reluctantly, I removed the precision OS ROM sockets that I'd installed. And that's quite a difficult job actually, because the desoldering gun can't really get much purchase. It can't really create much of a vacuum because the legs of the socket fit so snugly on the top of the board. So I had a bit of a fight getting them off, but I got them off, carefully inspected all the traces, cleaned everything up again, and what I've actually decided to go for is I've gone back to the old dual wipe machine sockets here, because they are a much better fit for these dip packaged chips. A nice snug fit. And of course it matches the rest of the sockets on the board. So I did that, and it still booted to a green screen. It didn't appear to have made any difference whatsoever. So I went away and I had a bit of a think about it, and I thought, well, maybe what we've got here is multiple issues. So it would be well worth, again, having replaced these sockets for a second time, doing some chip swaps again. And the first chip that I happened to swap out this time from the spare 1200 XL was the PIA chip. And when I did that, the machine booted straight up, as I will demonstrate. So just to prove that it works, let's turn it on. There we get the familiar blue screen, and then we jump straight into the Atari logo, which is a component of the 1200XL operating system, which was later removed to accommodate parallel bus code and I think the international character set. It's kind of useless, but some people like it anyway. So there you are, so it does actually work. And the culprit was this 6520 PIA chip. So had I tested the machine when it first arrived, it still would have taken a little bit of time to start swapping chips out to identify what the problem was, but it wouldn't have taken as long as the time that I've spent doing things this way, because I was just too lazy to go in the cupboard and hunt out the 9-volt AC power supply that I was going to need anyway eventually when I came to test the machine after I'd fitted the stuff. So I tried to do a shortcut there, and I got caught out. Now, even if I'd identified the issue with the PIA chip and then proceeded with the upgrades, I could still have inadvertently created a secondary issue, which appears to have been what happened here when I fitted those sockets. What I'm assuming is that there was a problem with the first set of sockets that I put on here. Swapping out the CPU, PIA, etc., therefore didn't allow the machine to work. And then eventually, in total desperation, about 3 or 4 hours into the troubleshooting, I decided that I was going to have to take off these precision sockets and replace them. And I've put dual wipe machine sockets on there this time because, as I say, I just didn't trust those precision sockets anymore. That's resolved the secondary issue, and then only when I became completely desperate and ran out of ideas and decided to start swapping ICs again, did I actually eventually fix the primary issue, which had been masked by the secondary issue. So now there's no issues. Always test the machine in its stock condition before you start, because if there's a problem with the machine in its stock condition, you need to eradicate that before you do any modifications whatsoever. And that's the exact strategy I followed here. I undid everything I'd done. Of course, I couldn't undo changing these sockets until I actually did undo changing these sockets and put a second set in. But I undid everything I'd done and thereby eliminated all the upgrades from the equation. And when you're trying to troubleshoot an issue like this, always assume it's the work you did to the machine. If it worked before and then you did something to it, 99% of the time it's the thing you did to the machine. There was a guy I had words with on the Atari Age forum maybe last year I think it was, and he'd bought one of the older style Ultimate 1MB boards when Plethoric for some crazy reason was putting right angle headers on them. So instead of the pins coming straight up in the air, they went out to the side, throwing the IDC connector out sideways like this rather than on top of the board. Absolutely terrible idea. Every time I bought one I'd take that connector off and put one of these on. Well, this guy in the forum, he'd obviously wanted to do the same thing, so then he took the right angle connectors off, put these enclosed straight headers on the board, and then the board didn't work, and he was on the forum saying, oh, I think I've been sold a faulty Ultimate 1MB. I think there's a problem with the CPLD. And I thought, what the hell are you talking about? You changed it and now it doesn't work. There's a 99% probability that it's the thing that you did to the board that's broken it. And he posted some pictures of the soldering work, and I thought it looked a bit ropey anyway. And of course, a couple of days later, he said, oh yeah, I broke a trace on the board. I hadn't noticed. Obviously, broke a trace on the board goes without saying. So actually, I just had to dig this thread out. So this thread was originally started about the same problem, a system where cartridges wouldn't work after Ultimate 1MB was installed. That's commonly because the user's got the PBI hard disk driver enabled, but has a different cartridge, a non-Side 2 or Side 3 cartridge plugged in. They expect it to still work, and it doesn't. But in this case, we didn't get much information initially, just that it didn't work, and naturally I and a couple of others apparently fighting to get in there first with the solution suspected it was exactly that problem, the same problem again. But anyway, it turned out not to be, because this was on default settings and it wasn't the PBI BIOS. So straight away I thought probably the MMU, because yeah, there we go, RD4 and RD5 not working. MMU cable will cause this exact issue. The reason I said that is because I've seen it before. Most common point of failure, typically the user has to put a socket under the MMU it's probably not going to be the cable, so it's probably going to be the socket. And what he hadn't initially told us, as I said, is that he modified the board. So he put these headers on here after the fact. He did acknowledge that he may have damaged it when he was doing this work. I don't know, he seemed a little bit defensive about it. And we got all sorts of noise in this thread about firmware, plugins, where the signals are tapped from, how long the wires are, absolutely all sorts of stuff. And every time I made a comment, it seemed to get buried in all the other material. We got a few pictures there. There was a photo I looked at, and in fairness, I did suspect it might be the MMU socket. But in my mind, there was no point in even considering anything else until that was eliminated. But the guy said that he put the original ICs back in the machine and everything worked fine. So therefore, it couldn't be the socket. It had to be the ribbon cable, which, as I've said, it probably wasn't the ribbon cable unless he's had the ribbon cable apart and put it together again. So it had to be the Ultimate 1MB itself, and he seemed quite reluctant to go along with this idea. There's a picture of the socket. It doesn't look great, but, it has to work. If he put the original MMU back in and the system works properly, it can't be the socket. So he did mess on with the socket. I can't remember why, because I think he'd already ascertained that the system worked when he put the original MMU back in, when I'd missed a photograph, because there was that much material being posted by everybody jumping in and suspecting it was this and that. So he's traced the MMU cable, no breaks, no problem, focus on the Ultimate 1MB, if I have my pins correct, etc, etc, etc. And actually now I look at this picture, with the benefit of hindsight, you can see there's a big ding at the bottom of the board there, just where I'm hovering the mouse, but you can see there's a massive scratch there. 2 weeks go by, update, my mate loaned me his Ultimate 1MB, and with a direct swap, his one's working perfectly. So not my dodgy soldering of cables. Well, how the hell do you reach this conclusion if the Ultimate 1MB board that he altered by replacing the headers doesn't work, and then he swaps the board out with another one that does work? It has to be the Ultimate 1MB. But then, unbelievably, then we start to talk about RMAs and warranties and plugins, and here we've got recheck your soldering job. Well, that's solid advice. Check the ribbon cables. Well, I thought we'd already eliminated them because he swapped the board out and it worked. Ribbons work on my mate's, there we go, so ribbons work with my mate's Ultimate 1MB. Any suggestion gets thrown out there other than damage to the board through the desoldering. And then we've got, trouble is you won't be able to get a replacement under warranty as you've worked on it. A replacement under warranty? What the hell am I reading here? This is absolute insanity. I wasn't expecting replacement under warranty. Lesson learned. Should have tested the Ultimate 1MB before modifying. So the conclusion he's drawn here is that it didn't work from the point he actually bought it. Just unbelievable. There we go. So I say I can pretty much guarantee you damage the board when you replace the MMU header. As I said on the 1st of November, 2 weeks previously, as soon as I noticed you'd replace the header, at which point the cable and socket are pretty much off the suspect list. It's an implausible coincidence that the cartridge signals I told you were to blame at the beginning of the discussion, which I was correct about, just happened to be on the header you replaced, and regardless of the fact you tidied up the MMU socket on the motherboard after the fact, the original socketing job you did was a mess. So this all adds up to the fact you damaged the Ultimate 1MB when you worked on it, and it's likely you'd need to remove the header again in order to locate and repair the fault, which would likely cause more damage. There you go. And he comes back with, oh, I'm not too sure I'm guaranteed to have damaged it without testing the Ultimate 1MB with a cartridge before I modified it. It's then really only your conjecture. There is still, however outside, the possibility it was faulty on delivery. Why the bloody hell would you assume that?
Are you fucking retarded?
Seems pretty pointless to humiliate me. Also here he's going into victim mode now. I was just after some pointers on what to try, man. Boy, did he get some. 2 pages of fucking every idea under the sun. So I respond to him there, and this is exactly what I've been talking about. I'm not pretending I don't make mistakes. So if cartridges don't work, my troubleshooting list in order would be as follows. Did I just replace the MMU header on the Ultimate 1MB? If yes, check that. Did I modify, shorten the MMU cable? If so, check that. Make a new one. If not, assume that the one provided by the seller works, because they usually do. Did I socket the MMU or replace an existing MMU socket? If so, check that. Assuming the Ultimate 1MB is faulty out of the box is the absolute last resort, even if the board itself is unmodified, and if you already performed reasonably significant modifications to the board before fully testing it, you broke it. So we go on a bit further and a bit further and a bit further, and here we go. This is 16 days, I think, after the beginning of the discussion. Update I discovered using my high magnification glasses that I'd cut at least 2 traces in my attempt to remove the old headers on my Ultima 1MB. So there you go. So a full page of posts later on. It's exactly as I said it was. That whole thing could have been resolved in the space of about 5 or 6 posts. So in this case, what appears to have happened, I'm assuming, I may never know for sure, but when I took those original 24-pin machine sockets off the board and replaced them with 28-pin turned precision sockets, something wasn't quite right there. I don't know what, but something wasn't quite right. That prevented swapping the PIA chip the first time I tried it from making the machine work. Whatever the cause of the crash, whether it was some short or some open circuit on the address bus or a dodgy PIA chip, the symptom was identical, a green screen. The OS was crashing before it had a chance to initialize the video hardware, so it just got that green screen. And the fact that the symptoms were uniform, regardless of whether it's because of a bad PIA chip or a problem with the OS ROM sockets, is confusing and misleading, obviously. But when I eventually changed those sockets again, and in complete desperation decided to redo the chip swap test, which isn't a bad idea actually, if you that you could do that pragmatically, undo another change that you've made, in this case the sockets, and then do the chip swaps again, which is eventually what I ended up doing, although it took a preposterously huge amount of time to get through all this troubleshooting, and that eventually fixed the machine. So learn from this experience. I'm going to try and learn from this experience. The next time I get a computer in and the customer says, oh, it works fine, I'm going to plug it in, as I usually do, and turn it on just to be absolutely sure before I do anything to the board. And as I say, normally I do that, but I think it was because this requires a different power supply that I don't always have connected on the desk, that I was just being a bit lazy basically, and boy did that cost me. But now I can proceed to get the Ultimate 1MB wired up again. So I just have to readjust these jumpers again, fit the 4-way wiring harness, which should be somewhere under this pile of bits on the desk. Fit that again. These are already done and cut to length at least, so that won't take any time. So I just got to do a little bit of wiring, do a little bit of jumper configuration, and then I will demonstrate the Ultimate 1MB in action, hopefully. Okay, nice and neat. Let's turn on. Yes! Oh, God for that. Nasty composite video. So this is stock composite video on a 1200 XL. It's absolutely fucking terrible. But we'll shortly rectify that problem when we install Spectre AV. So that should improve the situation somewhat. Right, so we've got the Spectre AV installed here, and we've got the PokeyMAX installed. Now, I can't actually fit a stereo jack in the position that I wanted to because I've run out of them, the particular one I want. But what I've done here, because the jack, I think, depending on what I can do when the part arrives, I think the jack's going to have to be mounted to the case here, because I can't really raise it up sufficiently highly from the motherboard where it'll just poke out at the appropriate place. But if the machine has to be taken apart, we can just disconnect that, fling that wire over the back of the case, and then lift the motherboard out. A bit of a compromise. So everything's basically hooked up now, and I did mention during the darker moments yesterday when I couldn't get this machine to boot that I was having a problem. I mentioned this to the client, and later in the day, fortunately, of course, I was able to send him a quick follow-up email. He hadn't responded at that point, just saying that the PIA was bad and basically explaining the circumstances that led up to discovering what the problem was. And he replied this morning. I was absolutely taken aback because he sent me some money to cover me time, which I thought was incredibly generous of him, especially since, as I explained when I replied to him, that really it was partly my fault, that the amount of time invested was partly my fault because I didn't check to see the machine worked. And anyway, he confirmed that the machine did work the last time he used it, so we can only conclude that the PIA chip died in transit or the first time I turned it on for some reason. Now, just for absolute full openness and clarity, This is the original PIE chip. I'm going to put it back in just to be absolutely sure that that was the problem, because obviously the money the client sent over, it'll certainly more than compensate the price of a replacement PIE chip. I'm going to pop this in again and we'll switch on. And there we go, we've got nothing. This is actually, this is a black screen rather than a green screen. Well, of course, since I fixed the problem, I've installed the Ultimate 1MB. So for some reason, possibly because the Ultimate 1MB BIOS, maybe it gets as far as initializing the hardware, we now get a black screen. So the graphics hardware has been initialized, but the operating system has crashed thereafter. So we'll turn off again and we'll take the original PIE out again, and we'll put the replacement, which I just took from that spare 1200 XL I was using for chip swapping, and we'll put that back in again. I mean, what do adventurous IT people do for extramarital activities? Do they go to chip swapping parties, I wonder? I don't know. Anyway, switch on. And there we go, it boots up. Interestingly, we get a funny looking Sparta-DOS X prompt there, so I hope there's not another problem. I should probably disconnect the PokeyMAX because it hasn't got the correct core for the connections I've put on. As usual, so we can get the key clicks through the stereo output, I need to actually flash the PokeyMAX with the stereo and Covox core rather than the quad Pokey core. So we'll try it with that disconnected just in case that was giving us an issue. No, it wasn't that. Funny thing with 1200 XLs, you sometimes see rather strange effects when you boot with the keyboard disconnected. So I'm going to put the board back in the case. I'm not going to put the side panel on or anything, I just want it so I can plug the keyboard in. Okay, let's try again. And this will give us an opportunity to see if the keyboard works as well, although I'm, as a matter of course, going to take it apart and do the fix, the Mylar fix. No, we've still got that. That's very, very odd indeed. System error. No, there's something funny going on here. I wonder if we need the reset cap modification on this computer. Turn this off. Why is that turned off? That's weird. Try again. There's something very strange going on here. So Sparta-DOS X is enabled, but it's going directly to the loader. That's weird. I think we'll update the firmware. So the keyboard at least works sufficiently so that we can use the machine. Uh-oh. Uh-oh! Oh, God, no. Oh, God. Oh. Let's see if we can do a cheeky firmware update on the Ultimate 1MB just by using the Side 3 cartridge. Might get us out of trouble. Probably what's needed is the capacitor between reset and ground on this computer. Right, so that's enabled, so we'll boot into that. Right, at least we've got into here. Right. So this is working sufficiently well so that we can flash the Ultimate 1MB, and then I'll feel a little bit more familiar with what I'm dealing with here. Yes. Oh dear God. Great thing about this is you can still see something's happening. Oh God. This is going to be one of those computers, isn't it? Oh. So it looks like the address and data bus are working okay because the program's working. This looks like a phase 2 clock timing issue. So we may need a 74F08 chip in this computer. And of course we've got an Ultimate 1MB with Alliance SRAMs and a diode bodge on it. Oh god, no. Ugh. Yeah, this really oh shit. So I've taken the flash ROM out of the Ultimate 1MB and I've put it in the TL866 USB programmer. Apologies for the resolution here, but I'm just doing a quick screen capture. And when I go to program the chip, I get an error persistently, which is weird. I'll reseat the chip. This is quite odd. So here's the chip in the adapter, so I'll take it out again. And I know the programmer's fine because I've just programmed another chip from my supply, which I thought I would do just in case we had a problem with this one. So if we go back here, yeah, this chip just won't program. The one that shipped with the Ultimate 1MB as purchased just won't program. So I'll take this one out and I'll do mine again. This is the one that doesn't work. Take that one out. I'll put the one in I've just programmed just now, and I'll program it again. There we go, and it's programming. Well, I'll let this one program, and then I'll try the original IC again. And this is a chip from my supply. These are the ones I bought, and I put one of them in an Ultimate 1MB in a video last year or earlier this year because the machine just wouldn't boot with the original flash chip in it. And for some reason I thought of swapping it out for one of these, and then it worked. So there you go, that's programmed successfully. So I'll cancel that one. I'll take my chip out of the adapter and I'll put the other one in. Right, so let's put this chip in here. So this is the original flash ROM. Same adapter, same everything. Let's have another try. And it doesn't want to know. Interesting. What I think we should do is we'll put the chip from my stash of chips in the Ultimate, which I've programmed with the Side 3 firmware, and we'll test the machine, see what happens, see if it's any different, see if it's any better, see if it's any worse. And we, as we should, we come straight to the setup menu because this is a brand new installation, so that's all working okay. VX S3 ST core, that's okay for now. We've got the Side 3 plugins, etc, etc, so we'll save that. Look good so far. We're going to get stuck on this funny SDX prompt again though, with just the right point and wedge and no drive identifier, which I didn't like at all. Yes we are. Yes we are. That's strange. I want to see if we can program this flash ROM in situ. So let's try that again. We've got no auto repeat on the keyboard. What the hell is going on with so the it's reading the file. Right, so let's see if the screen goes crazy again. Yeah, and it does. Oh! Right, so this one's failed in the exact same manner. So this one's bricked again, so I'll have to reprogram it. Oh, God! So after all that, another couple of hours of faffing about trying to figure out what was wrong with this thing, it turns out that the PIA chip that I put in to replace the one that's busted had pin 1 bent double under itself, and that's why Spartados was acting up and nothing else was working properly. Oh God! Oh God! Complete noob mistake. I was getting pretty desperate there actually, but sometimes with these things you've just got to sit it out until your mind leads you to the solution. That's one of the most common noob mistakes really with things like this, is when you're taking chips in and out of these sockets, especially if you're doing so relentlessly when you're trying to fix something. Every now and again one of them gets bent double under itself, and that causes no end of problems, as you can imagine. And my eyesight years ago would have been able to spot that straight away, but I have to do everything with this bloody magnifier now. I'm getting too old for this, I really am. So let's power it on again and witness it working correctly. Of course, I still haven't been able to reprogram the flash ROM chip that came with the Ultimate 1MB board, so I'll just have to leave the one that I put in there, and we'd better test to make sure that in-place flashing works okay. So let's turn it on. Okay, so we were getting this before. Oh God. There we go. I turned off extended RAM, which was kind of how I discovered this actually. As you can see, it says no extended RAM. I'll just plug the keyboard in and show you what I did. I may not have figured it out if it wasn't for this. So I went in here and it was set to 1 megabyte of RAM. Now it looked like Spectre X was having some sort of RAM based issue, RAM or ROM in fact, because when I typed commands at the command prompt, typically it just spewed out all sorts of nonsense. So it was either having trouble retrieving bits of code in ROM or in RAM. Now Spectre X packs bits of itself in extended memory when you've got more than 128k by default. So I figured I'd turn that off and see if things changed, and things did change, because with no extended memory, Spectre X just locked up when it tried to boot. So that suggested to me that that Spectre X, if there's no extended RAM, it then defaults to trying to use the RAM under the operating system, and to turn off the ROM, PIA is used, port B. So that led me to have a look at PIA, and I took the PIA chip out the board and inspected it, and sure enough, pin 1 was lifted up. So there was a method to how this was figured out actually. So we can turn extended RAM on again and boot and see if things are working with extended RAM, and if they are, I think it's fixed. Yeah, that's looking better. Right, that's good. That's all working as we would expect. Now I'm going to plug in the SIO cable. So I'm going to try and flash the Ultimate firmware. I want to reset. So this machine doesn't appear to be blighted by the reset issue that we often see on 1200 XLs. After all, that had absolutely nothing to do with it. So let's run UFlash. That's good. We don't get that weird glitch that we were getting before. So I'm just going to flash the same firmware that was on the machine to begin with. And it's running at divisor 0, 126 kilobits per second. That's all working nicely. It's a bit quiet. There we go. Got some SIO noise. What an absolute palaver. Yeah, we got no weird screen effects or anything now, so this is obviously working. Okay, so that's worked. What an absolute relief that is. Now, I've got the next challenge is I've got the customer's side 3.2 with JED 20. Oh no, it's got the alternate JED from February 2024 on it, so I'm probably going to have to flash that. So anyway, I need to try and make this work with this computer. Now, I've already put a 74 FO8 chip in the machine. Oh, I'm just so relieved this works now. I was getting so absolutely desperate and exasperated. I was on the verge of going on the Atari Age 8-bit forum and asking for some advice there, to be quite honest. But on the Atari Age 8-bit forum, we've got people who can identify an Atari XEGS just because the person who started the thread mentioned that it was running Missile Command and had a detachable keyboard, which is just absolutely startling.
I didn't know that. You're telling me now for the first time.
It just never ceases to amaze me, the level of technical prowess we have in this wonderful community. Anyway, so let's plug this cartridge in. I'm sure it's not going to work with, certainly not with this JED, but you never know. And it has in fact come up. Grab a slightly more interesting SD card. This actually doesn't seem to be too bad. This must be one of the handful of machines that happen to work better with JED 2.4, or whatever the fuck it is, than with the prior one. There's not many of them about, but they obviously exist, so we'll try Ace of Aces. That is working quite nicely. Let's have a look at RW test. Yes, we'll unmount the cart. Okay, that's fine. Ah, I'm quite impressed. no errors in the file list. Maybe I'll just leave this alone. If certainly if the user proposes to use this cartridge with this machine most of the time, all I have to do is take about 0.5 millimeter, 1/4 millimeter off either side of this case, and it'll fit in the machine, no problem. That's the margins, the tolerances we're actually talking about with these cases. It's not a big deal, but if they could only have been made, I did try. I think we planned to address this issue of just slimming this cartridge shell down by just that tiny fraction. I'm talking about probably 1 millimeter in total. There was a communication breakdown and it all got fucked up and nothing was done about it. So fairly typical in fact. But so we've got to file the bastard things down, but never mind. Yes, I'm going to run RWCRC, which will take ages. But if this passes, notice that we've got some refresh bars down the screen. They're not always there. It just seems to depend when you turn the computer on whether they're there or not. That's not actually unusual. I've even seen quite pronounced jailbars on UAV equipped machines. It's just something about these 1200 XLs, but it's fairly irritating actually. Seemingly turn it on from cold a lot of the time and it looks absolutely fine. You don't have these green stripes. But as I've said before, Spectre AV is not as good as UAV. It simply isn't as good, especially when it comes to colour saturation. I think it's slightly overdriving the colour, this board, but I think we need to adjust the colour pot as well on this computer because it's a bit... with it being NTSC, it should be more that colour, and that looks a little bit better. That's more the NTSC blue. So yeah, so I'm going to leave this to run, and we'll wrap up at the end of it, I think. And as you can see, that test has completed without any errors. Now that's not to say this is the end of the burn-in testing program by any means. I've learned to hang on to completed machines for a few days and keep using them just in case anything crops up. And of course I still have to preemptively do the Mylar fix on this keyboard, even though it does appear to work fairly reliably now. And the client wants me to fill the SD card up with games and all sorts of stuff as well, which I don't mind doing. And despite the fact that, as you can see, this case is in absolutely lovely condition, no discoloration or anything, I might just buff out some of these little scratches on the little scuffs on top of the perspex here, and then it'll look pretty much perfect. So I hope you enjoyed this look at this lovely Atari 1200 XL, and maybe picked up a few tips along the way learning from my mistakes, and you might avoid spending an enormous amount of time chasing up problems. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you to all of you who interact with the videos, leave comments, etc. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy reading them and responding to them. And special thanks, of course, to my patrons. All was very, very much appreciated. Also to the video sponsor. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video. So bye bye for now.